spirituality is the innate human need to be connected to something larger than ourselves, something we consider to be sacred or noble or perhaps even divine. And I allow people wide use of synonyms because certain words can trigger allergic responses in people. So the innate human need is a tie back to Maslow. I believe spirituality is an innate human need to be connected to something larger than ourselves. Religion is a structure, generally man-made, although it can be divinely inspired, that can help us meet our spiritual needs, but it can also sometimes get in the way. It is a smaller word. So spirituality is the big word. We have this innate human need. Religion is the smaller word, the structure that may support your growth. Now, what is spiritual intelligence? When I started trying to define and think about those spiritual leaders, what came to my mind is spiritual intelligence is love in action, to me. That was my first pass. And then I thought the word love is really problematic because if you try to define love, you can get into these very long, agonizing 10-page definitions or Greek or Latin words, and it can be very off-putting. So I looked for a simpler definition, and I found a beautiful parable from the Eastern traditions that love is a bird with two wings. One wing is wisdom, the other wing is compassion. If either wing is broken, the bird cannot fly. And it still gives me goosebumps to this day as a deep truth. Wisdom, the most elevated state of what we might think of as the head center. Compassion, the most elevated state of the heart center. Coming together in physical form to love in action, a bird with two wings. That leads to this definition. Spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave being a crucial word, with wisdom and compassion, in other words, love, while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. Now, that last bullet is the saintly level of this. Like, I have minutes, moments of being able to behave with wisdom and compassion and to keep my calm in the face of crazy, but I can't claim saintdom. In many ways, I wrote this model for myself. This was my query after getting trained in EQ as to where is the SQ stuff. And when I couldn't find it and it wouldn't let me sleep, I decided maybe it was my task to do in this life to try and describe it. So I am every bit as much a student of the model as anyone else. The basics of SQ involve shifting from operating out of ego, which I do not demonize ego. I talk about the importance of growing the ego up, but shifting from operating primarily out of unconscious, immature ego into a well-developed connection with higher self, where higher self is kind of driving the car of your life. Ego is acting as navigator. Ego has a better sense of how other egos operate. So it's a very useful part of navigating this world. We use a lot of synonyms in this work to try and enfold and embrace as many perspectives as we can without triggering allergic responses. So if you don't like the word higher self, you might prefer soul or spirit, Atman, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, divine nature, non-dual self, witnessing self, authentic self, true self, ... right? But we say higher self as the generic, and then we have glossaries, which you can see at deepchange.com under resources. Is a whole lot of free stuff, including free glossaries and glossaries that we have written for each of the 5 major world religions, so that people who are faith-based can connect. Now here are the 21 skills in the same kind of 4 quadrants that you saw with emotional intelligence. So in the emotional intelligence upper left quadrant, you may remember, was self-awareness, where emotional self-awareness was the big yellow bolded thing. Here, it's higher self with a capital S self, ego self-awareness. Higher self, ego self-awareness. And in this quadrant are 5 separate skills. Awareness of your own worldview, awareness of your life purpose or mission, awareness of your values and their relative hierarchy, complexity of inner thought, and awareness of your ego self and higher self. So those 5 together kind of make up ego self, higher self awareness. The upper right quadrant is universal awareness. So remember, we're not trying to map to Ken's 4 quadrants. I actually hadn't found Ken when I started this. I know it's appalling. How could you not have found Ken yet? But I found Ken after I found Suzanne Cook-Greuter, and then I found Ken, and then I found spiral dynamics. So they all ended up coming back and unfolding and being like me double checking myself. Was there something that needed to be tweaked in this model? I feel like it's pretty sound. No model's perfect. Anybody, who knows models, no model's perfect. But universal awareness is what I put here, where Goleman and Boyatzis had social awareness. So here it's about being aware of the interconnectedness of all life, being aware of the worldviews of other people, having a broad perception of time and also space, awareness of the limitations and the power of human perception, awareness of spiritual laws, and experience of transcendent oneness. Finally, she put states in there. So experience of transcendent oneness is definitely one of the skills. But notice it's one skill of 21. So this is where podiatry comes in, right? So it's like where do the feet hit the ground? What's the walking through your earthly life look like? States are very helpful, and I'm going to show you how I describe those in a little bit. But they're not the whole story, at least for lines of intelligence. The lower left is self-mastery, ego, self, higher self-mastery, which includes keeping your higher self in charge, skill 13. And then the 4th quadrant is social mastery and spiritual presence, which gets you the outcomes that you probably would like to have, which include these skills: being a wise and effective mentor, being a wise and effective leader, making compassionate and wise decisions, being a calming and healing presence in the world, and being aligned with the ebb and flow of life. I was very blessed to have Suzanne Cook-Greuter volunteer to help me when I was nobody and hadn't published much. And she said, look, if you want to do a cross-correlation, because I had told her I did, she said, I will allow that we can give everyone who comes to me for an assessment the option to take your assessment and be part of your research database. So we had 139 people agree to do this, which was fantastic. And from that sample, before I get to the sample, let me explain. Not everybody knows Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model. She and Torbert and Joyner and Josephs have used very varying terms for these stages, but let me roughly map it for you so you kind of know what we're talking about. On the top, you have the pre-conventional stages. In the middle, you have the conventional stages, and on the bottom, you have the post-conventional, which some research that David Rourke had done and published in the Harvard Business Review was showing a very strong connection to capacities as a transformative leader. All right, and that was actually how I found Suzanne in the first place, was through the Harvard Business Review article. So the expert and achiever stages there are in the late conventional. Expert would be considered late blue to early orange, and achiever would be peak orange. And this was a really helpful part of her model. I'm also trained in Don Beck's model, and the expert's missing from that model, and it's a really helpful stage for coaching, because I ended up kind of making a niche out of coaching to experts because I spent a lot of time hanging out in that zone, so I have a lot of compassion for the expert zone. All right, but that's kind of roughly how these things correlate. So here's the result of the 139 data points. What you see on the left is 0 to 100 going up the vertical scale. There are 21 skills. The maximum score for any skill is 5. So the maximum should say 105, but nobody gets 105, so we just cut it off at 100 because it was pretty. So there we are. It stops at 100. Going from left to right across the bottom, you have the diplomat, which is blue on the spiral, or amber in Ken's language, the expert, which straddles the blue-orange, the achiever, which is peak orange, the individualist, which is green, the strategist, early yellow, magician, probably yellow turquoise kind of blend, and ironist turquoise plus. What you see as the purple line going from left to right up is the average or the mean SQ21 score by stage. So this is the stage center of gravity that they scored on Suzanne's model compared to their score on my assessment that I had created. What you see is the average steadily goes up from left to right. So that was the first, oh, thank goodness, because if it had gone the other way, I'd been very worried about a lot of my assumptions. So I was grateful to see that. Now, the surprise for me was, look at the achiever. The achiever goes from a low of just above 20 to a high of almost or maybe right at 90, even though the average is about 66 or 67, average is about 57, 58 on the achiever. So what does that mean? And as I thought about it, this actually made sense to me as a line of intelligence, because lines and stages are not necessarily the same. Can you have a highly successful achiever who has a lot of SQ, and would you rather work with that person than the person who's an achiever with a low SQ? Yes, I think I would, yeah. Now, this also is kind of encouraging. We don't have to yank the whole country up to yellow to be less annoying as a country. We could just increase the line of intelligence around emotional and spiritual intelligence and get to a place where we're way more functional. And maybe the future human doesn't mean everybody has to get to second tier. Enough people, I think, need to get to second tier to hold the complexity to deal with the world situations that we're facing and the meta crises. But I think what we need is less annoying people at the earlier stages, because we develop EQ and SQ.